Welcome back to Mrs. Kate's YouTube channel. In this lecture, we will discuss different ways to measure income and standard of living. Specifically, we will explain two different ideas, gross domestic product and the Human Development Index. By the end of this lecture, it is expected that you will be able to describe the ways that income and standard of living are measured around the world, including gross domestic product and the Human Development Index, and compare these two different metrics and evaluate which method is better for measuring overall standard of living. So let's get started. The first concept that we will discuss is gross domestic product, or GDP. GDP is the value of all the goods and services that are produced within a country within a given period of time, typically over 1 year. There are a few ways to measure GDP. I want to highlight two of them: expenditure, or spending, and income. The easiest way to understand this is to look at expenditures, or the amount of money that people spend within a country in a given year. So this includes the things that people buy, such as groceries or clothes. Similarly, it includes services that people pay for, like going to a restaurant or taking a university class. It also includes the stocks that people purchase and investments that people make, which are ways that people save their money. If you add up all the money that people spend in the country in a year, you get the total expenditure, GDP. When you divide a country's total GDP by the number of people living and working in that country, you get GDP per capita. GDP per capita is often considered a reflection of a country's standard of living. Another way to measure GDP is with income. This is called gross domestic income. This is the amount of money that people will make within a country in a given year. Very simply, you add up all the money that people make in a country during the year, and this gives you the total income GDP. Again, when you divide this by the number of people who are living and working in a country, you arrive at GDP per capita. This is also used to reflect people's standard of living within a country. Hypothetically, expenditure GDP should equal income GDP. The amount that people make should equal the amount of money that people spend or save. So GDP per capita in both calculations should be the same. This map shows you GDP around the world. Take a look. What do you see? Countries like the US and Canada, those in Western Europe, and Australia have the highest GDP per capita. You'll also notice that very tiny countries in the Middle East, like Kuwait or the UAE or Qatar, are also ranked very high. These countries are typically ones that are considered most developed. Compare that to the lowest income countries, which are mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. These are usually considered the least developed countries. Remember, development is a spectrum. Many countries fall in the middle. So GDP tells us about money. It's an excellent way to understand the wealth in a country. But here's a question. Does knowing the amount of money that someone makes tell you about their standard of living? Some would say that money is the most important factor. When you have a high income, you're able to meet all of your basic needs and have lots of luxuries on the side. When you have a very low income, you are not able to meet your basic needs. It is hard to imagine a very high standard of living for someone without access to education and whose children are dying before the age of 5. But let's look at an example. Here you have two people. Last year, they both made the same salary. Their income was the same. This year, both women died. The woman on the left died at the age of 30. The woman on the right died at the age of 65. Who lived a better life? Clearly, the woman on the right. Life expectancy, or how long you live, is important to consider too. Thinking in this way, some people felt that GDP, which only looks at money, doesn't tell the whole story. So this brings us to our second way to measure quality of life and standard of living, the Human Development Index. In 1990, economist Amartya Sen developed the Human Development Index. If you ever have a chance to read any of Amartya Sen's work, I would highly recommend it, particularly Development as Freedom. Anyway, Sen felt that GDP was an insufficient measurement of standard of living, so he proposed a new way of measuring it, and he called this the Human Development Index. HDI is another way to measure standard of living. It includes income, but it also includes several other factors. So HDI includes income, but it also factors in things like life expectancy, which helps to tell us the health of a population, as well as literacy and education. These three things together, Sen felt, measure standard of living better than GDP. Here is a list of the top 10 countries according to each measurement. You'll notice that some are the same, but others are very different. I think it's interesting that Qatar is ranked number 2 when you measure GDP per capita. Qataris are very wealthy. But when you measure them according to the Human Development Index, they're actually ranked 36. This same trend is true with Kuwait. For GDP per capita, Kuwait is ranked number 8. But in the Human Development Index, Kuwait is actually ranked 54. Pretty bad. At the same time, countries like Norway, which is ranked as 3 and 1, are doing pretty well. Australia, the United States, even Japan, GDP per capita, I think, is ranked around 11. Very similar. Here is a list of the bottom 10 countries according to each measurement. What do you notice? I would say that many of these countries are the same. Mozambique, Niger, Eritrea, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, they're all on both lists. Even the ones that don't totally match, like Guinea isn't very high up on GDP per capita either. It's still ranked really, really low. So there isn't very much of a difference when you get to the very bottom. Here's a look at Saudi Arabia. I'll let you ponder why Saudi Arabia ranks so differently with each of the different measurements. One final thought on HDI. Since its introduction in 1990, this metric has gotten a lot of criticism. This is because there are a lot of other factors that relate to quality of life. Income and life expectancy and literacy are all great, but is the income distributed equally among people in the population? Also, what about the quality of environment and whether you're breathing in polluted air? How does it affect you if you don't trust your government? Each of these things isn't addressed in any of these metrics, neither GDP per capita or HDI, but they're still really important for someone's standard of living and their quality of life. In Unit 4, we'll be discussing human rights, and we'll come back to this question. We'll see if there are other ways of measuring well-being that factor in some of these other factors. But for now, this is your introduction to income and to GDP and HDI. You'll hear a lot about these terms in your reading and throughout your life. Now, as part of your homework, you'll be asked to compare these different methods and decide which one you think is better. So thank you for watching Mrs. Kate's YouTube channel, and thank you for doing your homework.